The stagecoach wheels sank deep into the mud as it rolled into Silver Ridge, Montana. Rain had not stopped for 3 days. It ran off rooftops and dripped from crooked porches like the town itself was crying. When the coach door opened, Eleanor Hart stepped down into the brown street, her boots swallowed to the ankle. The mountains loomed sharp and dark behind the town, their peaks hidden in low clouds. She did not look back at the coach. In her hand was a travel case, small but heavy. Not heavy with dresses or books, heavy with steel. Hidden beneath folded skirts and cloth wraps were instruments she had sworn never to touch again. She had traveled more than 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to bury that part of herself. But the past had sharp edges. It did not stay buried. A tall man stepped off the porch of the largest building on the street. Reed Mercantile was painted in white letters above his head. He walked toward her with slow, steady steps, broad shoulders, work-worn hands, a face lined by wind and long winters. Silver touched his dark hair at the temples. "Miss Hart?" he asked. "Yes." Eleanor lifted her chin. "Eleanor Hart. I'm Caleb Turner." His voice was calm and low. "Welcome to Silver Ridge." He reached for her case. She pulled it back before she could stop herself. "It's heavy," he said, not offended, just observant. "I prefer to carry my own things," she replied, too quickly. His gray eyes rested on her a moment longer than comfort allowed. He noticed the tremor in her fingers, the fine stitching on her gloves, the way she stood like someone trained to command, not serve. But he only nodded. "Your rooms are upstairs. Mrs. Kwan cleaned them this morning." Eleanor followed him across the muddy street. She felt the town watching. 2 miners leaned against the saloon wall, whispering. An older woman paused her sweeping to stare. A little boy pointed at her dress as if she were something brought in from another world. Inside the store, the smell of coffee, leather, and tobacco wrapped around her. It felt smaller than the city she had known, smaller and quieter. Like a place where secrets could survive. Upstairs, the rooms were simple but neat. An iron bed, a small stove, a wooden table with wildflowers in a jar. Someone had scrubbed the floors with lye soap. The sharp scent burned her nose. Caleb set a brass key on the table. "We'll speak in the morning," he said, "about the 3-month courtship we agreed to in our letters." She nodded. He hesitated at the doorway. "Why Silver Ridge?" he asked softly. "Why answer a stranger's advertisement?" Her heart thudded once, hard. "I was a school teacher," she said smoothly. "The family I worked for moved west. I wanted a fresh start." Caleb studied her face as if weighing truth against silence. Finally, he gave a single nod. "Fresh starts built this country," he said. When the door closed behind him, Eleanor leaned both hands on the table and breathed out. She had made it. No one here knew her name from the newspapers. No one here knew about the trial, about the wealthy man who blamed her when his wife died on the operating table, about the board that stripped her license and called it justice. She carried the case to the bed and opened it. Steel gleamed in the fading light. Scalpels, forceps, sutures. A bone saw wrapped in cloth. Her fingers hovered over her favorite blade. A memory flashed. Bright hospital lamps, the smell of antiseptic. A husband shouting. A woman dying no matter how steady Eleanor's hands had been. She snapped the case shut. "That woman is gone," she whispered. She shoved the case beneath the bed. The next morning came pale and cold. Wagon wheels creaked outside. The scent of wet pine drifted through the cracked window. Eleanor dressed in a plain gray day dress and pinned her hair into a modest bun. She practiced looking ordinary. A knock sounded. "Miss Hart?" Caleb's voice carried through the door. "I brought breakfast." She opened it to find him holding a tray of biscuits and coffee. He looked freshly shaved, though his boots were already muddy. They sat at the small table. Caleb spoke plainly. He would introduce her to the church on Sunday, show her the schoolhouse, help her find work if she wished. At the end of 3 months, if they both felt right about it, they would marry. If not, he would pay her fare to wherever she wanted to go. No anger, no ownership, just fairness. Eleanor had not expected kindness. She almost believed she could build something here. Then the scream came. It sliced through the morning air. Another followed. Then the hard, wild ringing of a bell. Caleb was already on his feet. "Mine collapse," he said, voice tight. Western Crown. Outside, men ran toward the edge of town. Women cried out names. The bell rang again and again, frantic and sharp. Eleanor moved to the window. Miners were being dragged from the shaft entrance. One man's leg bent the wrong way. Another clutched his chest, coughing red into his hands. Casualties. Her body reacted before her mind did. She turned toward the bedroom, toward the bed, toward the case hidden beneath it. "No," she whispered, but the bell kept ringing. Caleb's voice echoed from below. "They're bringing them to the livery. Move!" Eleanor dropped to her knees and pulled the case free. Her hands no longer trembled. They felt steady, familiar. She grabbed the handle and ran. Her boots struck the wooden stairs hard enough to shake dust from the railing. Rain still fell, but the air felt thick with fear. At the mine entrance, chaos reigned. Timber beams leaned crooked. Men clawed at debris with bare hands. A miner stumbled forward, supporting another whose bone pierced through torn flesh. The injured man made a sound that did not sound human. Eleanor stopped thinking. "Lay him flat," she ordered, pointing to clear ground. The miner stared at her. "Who are you?" "Someone who can help." She snapped open the case. Steel caught the gray daylight. The crowd went still. Caleb pushed through the bodies and froze when he saw the instruments laid out in perfect order. "Eleanor," he breathed. "Hold his shoulders," she commanded, "and do not let him move." It obeyed. She pressed fingers to the injured man's neck. Rapid pulse, shock, blood loss. If the leg was not set now, infection would take it, maybe his life. "I need clean water," she said sharply. "Bandages, whiskey." For a second, no one moved. Then they ran. As she poured whiskey over the wound, the town doctor hurried up the road, older than she expected, his medical bag swinging wildly. He looked at the exposed bone and paled. "Miss, step aside," he said, breath shaking.
"I'm the physician here."
Eleanor met his eyes. "With respect," she said calmly. "That leg must be set now. Can you do it?" His hands trembled. Behind them, more miners were dragged out. Too many. Far too many. He looked at the broken leg again, then back at her steady hands. "I can't handle them all," he whispered. "Then let me help," she said. Rain slid down her face like tears she did not have time to shed. The doctor swallowed once and stepped aside. "Take the leg," he said quietly. And just like that, the secret she had carried across the country stood in the open air of Silver Ridge. Eleanor placed her hands around the shattered bone. "On 3, she said, and the town watched as the woman who came to disappear revealed who she truly was. "Hold him steady," Eleanor said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the shouting. 4 men knelt around the injured miner. Caleb locked his arms under the man's shoulders. 2 others pinned his hips. A young ranch hand gripped the ankle with both hands, his face white. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked him without looking up. "Luke," he stammered. "Luke Harlan. Luke, when I tell you to pull, you pull straight. No jerking, no stopping. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." The miner on the ground was barely conscious. His eyes rolled. His mouth worked like he was trying to pray but could not remember the words. Blood soaked into the mud beneath him. Eleanor felt the broken ends through the skin. The leg was wrong in every way. She pushed down her fear until it became a hard, clear stillness. "On 3, she said. 1, 2, 3, pull." Luke pulled. The miner screamed. It was a raw sound that made women nearby turn their faces away. Caleb held tighter, his jaw clenched like he was fighting his own pain. Eleanor guided the bone into place with firm hands. She felt the moment the pieces slid where they belonged. Then she moved fast, not letting herself think. "Keep him still," she ordered. She cleaned the wound, picking grit and splinters with forceps. Her stitches came small and even, like rows of careful black thread. She wrapped the leg tight, splinted it with boards, and tied it down with strips torn from an old sheet. The man's breathing eased. He still shook with shock, but he was alive. A low sound rose from the crowd. Not cheering, not yet. Something between relief and awe. Eleanor looked up and saw faces staring at her like she was a strange kind of storm. A woman crossed herself. A child clung to his mother's skirt. Men who had laughed when she arrived now watched with their mouths half open. The town doctor knelt beside another miner, one coughing blood into his hands. The doctor's face was wet with rain and sweat. His hands shook so badly he could barely open his bag. Eleanor listened for 2 seconds. She heard the wet rattle in the miner's chest. She saw the way one side of his ribs barely moved. "Doctor," she called, her voice cutting through the noise. "He has a punctured lung." The older man blinked at her. "What?" "He needs a needle," Eleanor said. "Left side, high. You'll hear the air." The doctor stared like she had spoken a foreign language. "It's in my case," Eleanor said, sterile. "Take it." He hesitated, pride and fear wrestling in his eyes. Then another miner screamed behind him, and the hesitation broke. He took the needle. His fingers trembled as he followed her directions. When the air hissed out, the coughing miner's breathing softened. The man's eyes, wild with panic, finally blinked like he could see the world again. A gasp ran through the crowd. For the next 3 hours, Silver Ridge stopped being a town and became a battlefield. They dragged the injured to the livery stable. Lanterns were lit. Horses were moved out. Hay was shoved into corners. Blood soaked into the straw. The smell of iron and whiskey filled the air so thick Eleanor could taste it. Eleanor set broken arms. She stitched scalps. She pressed cloth hard against wounds that would not stop bleeding. She barked orders, and grown men obeyed like soldiers. "Boil water," she shouted. "Wash your hands before you touch them. Keep the worst injuries near the door so we can move fast." Women tore sheets into strips until their fingers bled. Boys ran buckets of hot water until steam fogged the stable windows. Someone started a fire outside to burn bloody cloth. Eleanor drew a line on the stable floor with charcoal. "Sick and coughing go on that side," she said. "Injured but not sick, stay here. Do not mix them." They stared at the line like it was magic. "It matters," she said, and her voice did not allow argument. Caleb stayed close, moving when she told him, lifting bodies, holding men down, carrying water. He did not ask questions, but she felt his eyes on her every time she reached into her case, every time she used a tool with a confidence that did not belong to a schoolteacher. When the last man was laid out and the shouting finally thinned, Eleanor's legs shook, not from fear now, but from the weight of what she had done without stopping. She straightened slowly, wiping blood from her hands with a cloth that was already soaked through. Half the town stared at her. The doctor sat on a hay bale, his face pale, his hands trembling in his lap. His eyes held Eleanor like he was trying to understand what kind of woman had walked into his town. Caleb stood in the stable doorway, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. His gray eyes were hard with something she could not name yet. The doctor cleared his throat. "Miss Hart," he said, "I need a word." In private. Eleanor followed him outside, away from the watching crowd. The rain had eased into a fine mist. The cold air bit into her wet sleeves. He leaned against the wall like his bones were suddenly heavy. "You're not an assistant," he said. "You're a physician." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I was." He gave a dry laugh that sounded like old boards creaking. "Thank God," he whispered, "because without you, men would be dead in there." His hands lifted, shaking in plain view. "My tremor started 2 years ago. I've hidden it, managed as best I could, prayed no true disaster would come." Eleanor felt a twist of pity and fear. She knew what it was to be ruined by something you could not fully control. "I would have killed men today through slowness," he said. "Not by cruelty, by weakness. His eyes sharpened. This town needs a doctor who can stand steady. So tell me, why are you hiding here pretending to be someone else? Eleanor's stomach turned. The answer was a stone in her chest. Before she could speak, footsteps splashed through mud. Caleb rounded the corner, his face tight. "Eleanor," he said low and controlled, "we need to talk." The doctor gave Eleanor one long look, then walked away without another word, leaving her alone with the man she had lied to from the moment she stepped off the coach. Caleb didn't speak right away. His eyes moved over her stained dress, her cut hands, the exhaustion in her face. "You told me you were a school teacher," he said at last. Eleanor swallowed. "I taught nursing students." His jaw clenched. "That isn't what you are." She held his gaze because she had nothing else left to hide behind. "I was trained as a doctor," she said. "Back east." Caleb's voice dropped. Why run? Why come here with a mail-order bride letter and a false name? The stable behind them groaned with human pain. Lantern light flickered through the cracks in the wood, like restless fire. Eleanor's shame rose like bile. She forced the words out anyway. "A patient died," she said. "A wealthy man's wife. The infection had already spread. I operated. She still died. Her husband blamed me. He used his power. The board took my license." Caleb's eyes darkened, but not with disgust, with anger. "They punished you because you were a woman," he said, not asking. Eleanor's breath shook once. They wanted a reason. Caleb stepped closer, his voice rougher now. "And you thought hiding in Silver Ridge would fix it?" "I thought it would end it," Eleanor whispered. "I wanted to be ordinary." Caleb stared at her hands. Blood still clung under her nails. "Ordinary doesn't run toward screaming," he said. "Ordinary doesn't save men with bones sticking out." Tears stung her eyes, but she did not let them fall. "Not yet. Now they'll hate me," she said, her voice tight. "They'll hear the story and decide I'm dangerous." Caleb's mouth pressed into a hard line. "You don't know these people yet." "I know people," Eleanor said. "I know how fast they turn." He took a breath like he was choosing his next words carefully. "My brother robbed a bank in Helena," he said quietly. "Went to prison. When folks here learned it, they wanted me gone too." Eleanor looked at him, startled. "I stayed," Caleb said. "I worked. I proved myself. Not because I was innocent of shame, but because running doesn't change what's true." His gaze held hers, steady as a fence post in a storm. "Everyone has a past, Eleanor. What matters is what you do now." Her heart twisted.
And what about us?
She asked, barely above a whisper. "You wanted a quiet wife, not a disgraced doctor with trouble behind her." Caleb's eyes softened, though his face stayed serious. "Today, I saw who you are," he said, "and I'm not afraid of it." Hope tried to lift inside her, thin and trembling. Then Caleb held out his hand. "Come on," he said. We faced them together. Eleanor stared at his hand like it was a bridge over a canyon. Her fingers shook again, not from fear of blood, but from fear of belonging. She took it. They walked back into the stable. The injured miner whose leg she had set lay awake now, pale but breathing. When he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "You saved me," he rasped. "Before we start calling her a hero," the man said, stepping forward in a fine vest with a gold watch chain, "I want answers." Edgar Grady, head of the Western Crown Mining Company, stared at her like she was a threat he meant to crush. "You say you're a doctor," Grady said. "Do you even have a license to practice in Montana?" The stable went silent. Eleanor felt the eyes of the entire town press down on her, waiting to see if she would lie again. And the truth rose to her throat like smoke. Eleanor stood still as Edgar Grady's question settled over the stable like ash. Lantern light flickered across wounded men and worried faces. Rain tapped the roof soft and steady, like the town was holding its breath. Caleb's hand stayed at the small of her back, warm and firm, as if he could keep her from falling apart. "Do you have a license?" Grady asked again, louder this time. "Yes or no?" Eleanor tasted iron on her tongue. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat.
No.
She said. A murmur rushed through the crowd. It was not anger yet. It was fear. Fear of what people did not understand. Fear of losing control. Grady's mouth curled. So, you are unlicensed. You want us to trust you with our husbands and sons? Eleanor lifted her chin. Her voice came out calm, even though her hands were still stained. You watched me save lives today, she said. Judge me by that. Grady took a step closer. Why don't you have a license, Miss Hart? The old ache rose behind her ribs. The bright hospital room, the shouting, the doors closing. A patient died back east, Eleanor said. Her husband was powerful. He blamed me. A medical board stripped my right to practice. They called it justice. Grady's eyes flashed. So you killed someone. Eleanor's voice hardened. People die even when a doctor does everything right. If you want a world where no one dies, you should stop working a mine. You should stop living at all. A hush fell. Even the injured men seemed to stop breathing. Grady turned toward the town physician, Dr. Lawson, who stood near the hay bales with his trembling hands held close to his chest. You're the doctor here, Grady said. Are you going to allow this? Dr. Lawson swallowed. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. Without her, he said, we would be burying men tonight. Grady scoffed. That's your opinion. It's fact, Lawson replied. His voice shook once, then steadied. And here is another fact. My hands are failing. I've been hiding it. Today, I could not keep up. This town needs help I cannot give alone. The stable filled with uneasy silence. Then a woman stepped forward, her apron stained with tears and soot. My husband is breathing because of her, she said. I don't care what some board back east decided. I care what I saw. Another voice joined. Then another. She saved Tommy Harlan. She stitched my boy's head. She stopped my brother's bleeding. The sound grew like a wave. Grady's jaw tightened as he realized he was losing them. He could not fight a whole town when the proof lay in straw and blood right in front of them. Dr. Lawson lifted his shaking hands. Dr. Hart can work beside me, he said. Under my roof. Under my name, if that's what it takes. I accept the responsibility. Grady's eyes narrowed. If someone dies, it's on you. Lawson nodded once. Then it's on me. Grady looked around at the faces, at the gratitude and fear mixed together. He turned sharply and walked out, his fine boots splashing through the mud as if the town itself offended him. Eleanor's shoulders loosened a fraction. She did not feel safe yet, but she felt something new. Not hiding. Caleb leaned close. You didn't flinch, he murmured. I'm tired of running, she whispered back. The days that followed moved fast, like a creek swollen with rain. Eleanor's medical case was no longer hidden under a bed. It traveled openly in her hand, from cabin to cabin, from the store to the livery stable, from the small office behind Dr. Lawson's home to the miner's bunkhouse. Lawson gave her a narrow room behind his clinic to use for patients. He called it a workspace, but everyone in town started calling it Eleanor's clinic by the end of the first week. Injuries from the collapse kept coming. Splinters and crushed fingers, burns from lantern oil, a boy kicked by a mule, a woman whose childbirth went wrong. Eleanor worked until her back screamed and her eyes burned. Then one cold morning, a miner stumbled through her door with fever blazing in his skin. His eyes were glassy. His breath smelled sour. A rash spread across his chest in angry, dotted patches. Eleanor's stomach dropped. She had seen that pattern before. Back east, in crowded streets where sickness traveled faster than truth. Typhus. The word hit her like a hammer. Silver Ridge was built close and tight. People shared bedding, shared water buckets, shared air in small rooms when snow pressed against the windows. If typhus took hold here, it would tear through the town like fire through dry grass. Eleanor did not wait for permission. She isolated the miner in the back room and barred the door. She sent Caleb to find Dr. Lawson and told him to bring every scrap of clean cloth and soap he could find. She went to the bunkhouse herself, her dress hem dragging through mud, her case banging against her leg. Inside, the smell of sweat and wet wool hit her. Men lay coughing in bunks. Lice crawled in seams of blankets. A few men already burned with fever, their faces flushed, their eyes unfocused. Eleanor swallowed her fear and turned it into orders. "Everyone out who isn't sick," she said. "Now." Some stared at her like she had lost her mind. "This is the mine's bunkhouse," one man protested.
We can't just... You can, Eleanor snapped.
"Or you can bury your friends." That changed the air. She made the healthy men move into the empty church room for sleeping. She separated the sick to one side of the bunkhouse and marked the floor with chalk, so no one crossed without her say. She ordered all bedding boiled or burned. She made women wash clothing in scalding water until their hands cracked. She scrubbed floors with harsh soap until the wood smelled raw and clean. People complained. People cried. People begged to keep their quilts because the nights were cold. Eleanor did not bend. "This is bigger than comfort," she told them, voice rough from shouting. "This is life and death." Even with her rules, cases spread. A shopkeeper's wife, a schoolboy, an old rancher who had not been near the mine but had hugged someone who was. Fever moved through town on invisible feet. Panic rose. The town council called a meeting in the church hall. Men packed the benches with hats in their hands. Women stood in the back with tight faces. The air smelled of damp wool and fear. Eleanor stood at the front and spoke in plain words. "We quarantine," she said. "We clean. We separate, sick from healthy. We stop gatherings. We stop sharing bedding. We wash hands like our lives depend on it." Because they do. A man shouted, "We'll starve if the mine shuts down." Eleanor met his gaze. "We screen workers. Anyone with fever stays out. Anyone who coughs stays out. The mine runs smaller, but it runs. This town survives only if we do this hard thing." Edgar Grady rose, his fine vest out of place among working men. His face was tight with worry now, not pride. "If we do what she says," he asked, "can we stop it?" Eleanor did not lie. "We can slow it," she said. "We can save many, but we must act now." Grady's eyes moved across the room, across the miners he needed, across the wives who would tear him apart if their children died. "The mining company will pay for soap and coal for boiling water," he said stiffly. "We will do it." It was not kindness. It was survival. But it was enough. For days, Eleanor slept in short pieces. An hour here, 2 hours there. She moved between sick rooms, checking pulses, wiping fevered brows, forcing water into mouths too weak to drink. She watched for delirium. She watched for the moment breathing turned shallow, and the eyes went distant. She lost 2 patients that first week, an elderly woman whose body could not fight anymore, a miner already sick from lung trouble. Eleanor washed their faces herself. She closed their eyes and felt the old guilt tried to climb up her throat. Caleb found her outside the clinic after the second death, her shoulders shaking with silent rage. "You did everything you could," he said. Eleanor's voice broke. "It never feels like enough." Caleb's hand cupped the back of her neck, steady and gentle. "Then you keep going," he said, "because this town needs you alive, not perfect." She nodded once, swallowed her grief, and went back inside. 2 days later, Edgar Grady came to her door again. This time, he was not a man looking to accuse. He was a father with fear cracked open in his face. "My daughter," he said, voice tight. "Martha, she's in labor. Something's wrong." Eleanor grabbed her case and ran. The Grady house was warm and rich compared to the cabins on the edge of town, but fear made it feel small. Martha lay on a bed drenched in sweat, her face pale, her hair stuck to her forehead. A midwife stood trembling at the foot of the bed. Dr. Lawson hovered nearby, his hands shaking too hard to help. "The baby's stuck," the midwife whispered. "It won't turn." Eleanor leaned in, listened, and felt her stomach knot. The baby's position was wrong. If they waited, both mother and child could die. Grady stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Save her," he whispered. "Please." Eleanor swallowed. The old hospital lights flashed in her mind again, cruel and bright. She pushed them away. "Boil water," she said. "Bring clean cloth, now." Hours passed like heavy stones. Eleanor worked with sweat on her brow and a tight ache in her chest. She guided the baby's position from inside, a risky move that could ruin everything. Martha cried out until her voice turned hoarse. Dr. Lawson held her hand, whispering prayers he barely believed. Eleanor listened again. The baby's heartbeat slowed. Eleanor's hand stayed steady anyway. "Stay with me," she murmured to Martha. "Look at me. Breathe when I tell you. You're not alone." Caleb stood in the doorway, face hard with fear, but he did not move. He waited the way men wait when they know their strength will not fix this. Then, finally, the room filled with a sound that made every chest loosen, a baby's cry. Martha sobbed. The midwife covered her mouth. "Doctor." Lawson sagged against the wall like his legs had forgotten how to hold him. Grady's eyes filled with tears he did not wipe away. He stepped toward Eleanor, his pride gone, his voice small. "I was wrong," he said, "about you, about everything." Eleanor wiped her hands and looked at him. "Then stand by what you saw," she said quietly. "Not what you feared, not what you saw." Grady nodded, slow and ashamed. "I will." The epidemic did not vanish overnight, but the town's spirit shifted. People stopped whispering her name like it was dangerous. They began speaking it like it was a rope thrown down into a deep hole. Still, danger came from farther away than fever or mine shafts. One afternoon, a stranger knocked at Eleanor's clinic door. He wore a fine coat, clean boots, and carried a leather satchel like he had never known mud. His accent carried the East in every word. "I'm Dr. Malcolm Pritchard," he said, "Territorial Health Officer. I'm here to investigate reports of typhus and reports of an unlicensed physician practicing in Silver Ridge." Eleanor's blood went cold. She let him in anyway. She showed him the quarantine rooms, the records she kept in neat handwriting, the lists of who was sick and who had recovered, the supplies bought with mining money and town sacrifice, the graves of the two she could not save. Pritchard watched with hard eyes, looking for mistakes. Then he pulled out a folded letter. A name printed on it made Eleanor's stomach drop. Nathaniel Ashford, the wealthy husband from back east, the man who had destroyed her once. Pritchard's voice stayed flat. "He wants you arrested," he said. "He claims you're dangerous." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. "He wants control," she said, "not justice." Pritchard studied her for a long moment. Then he looked past her, through the window, where townspeople stood outside waiting, watching, hoping. "Your work here is real," he said finally. "I can't ignore the law, but I also won't tear the only skilled hands out of this town during an outbreak." He pulled out a form and a pen. "I can issue an emergency territorial permit," he said. "Temporary, limited. You work under oversight. You report your cases. If you refuse, I have to shut you down."
It was not freedom.
But it was a door cracked open instead of slammed shut. Eleanor's throat tightened as she signed. When he handed her the stamped paper, she held it like it weighed more than gold. That night, the saloon filled with lantern light and quiet celebration. No wild dancing, no loud music, just tired people holding cups and letting hope sit with them for a moment. "Doctor," Lawson lifted a glass with trembling hands. "To Dr. Eleanor Hart," he said, "who saved us when we were falling apart." The room echoed with murmured agreement. Caleb stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, solid and real. Eleanor looked around at faces that had once stared at her with suspicion. Now they looked at her with gratitude, the kind that did not ask where she came from, only that she stayed. Outside, the mountains stood dark and watchful. Inside, Silver Ridge breathed together, bruised but alive. Eleanor had come west to vanish. An epidemic had dragged her truth into the open, and the town had chosen her anyway. If you love Wild West stories filled with passion and heart, like this video and subscribe to Wild West Tales of Love. for new stories every single day.